Most of the miracles that, I've read about or heard about, I don't believe in, because I believe they're superfluous, and to come back to the whole other word. A lot of the medical miracles and all of this, I simply don't believe that God is always doing this.
Which one, just name one that you really do believe in then.
The virgin birth, the resurrection.
Okay.
Don't push me.
That does seem really seriously inconsistent with the wonderful things you were saying earlier. It seems to be so...
It does.
Petty in a way.
It does. But from my religious faith, it's based upon, and I must say, it puts me in an embarrassing position as a scientist, but nonetheless, I can say that I'm consistent with myself by accepting that God is a God of love who loves in this way. And he's done this because he loved us, wanted to save us.
Yes, so the occurrence of evil is at least part of God's plan that evil will occur. I would agree with that God foresaw in some way or another that either evil would occur or is very likely to occur. Depends on what you think of God's knowledge of the future.
Very likely to occur, but when you have billions of opportunities,
it's bound to occur.
Statistically, it has to occur.
So the analogy would be like if I decided to create 1 million or 1 billion free-willed androids. We could just put them on an assembly line, and then I would create all these androids, and I knew some of them were going to use their choice badly.
You don't know which ones.
I know which one. Now, I wouldn't say in that case I created the evil. I would say I created the conditions that would inevitably lead to the evil. Maybe you find that just a philosopher's way out.
A distinction without a difference.
Right.
In fact, I don't believe in evolution. So
Dr. Collins and you can have a discussion about that.
We can, and I'll tell you the reason why. Evolution says that because there are these similarities, even though we can't specifically connect them, it proves that this is what happened. Well, let's say somebody came here from another planet after our planet has been destroyed by, terrorism and nuclear weapons and everything, and they find, some Volkswagens, and they find some Rolls Royces, and they look at them and they say, wow, these are really very similar, and they all have wheels and a transmission engine. Obviously, this Rolls Royce is much more sophisticated. It must have evolved from this Volkswagen.
We are persons. God is a person, and therefore we can relate to him. That's
what
the whole business is
a person? Was Homo erectus a person?
Well, I can't decide by looking at fossils whether it was a person or
not.
not.
But do you think it happened
gradually?
Do you think it happened gradually? I mean, or was there a moment when a child was born that was a person and its parents weren't?
My own feeling is that there was a point when God did something special, but it would be very hard to detect that from any scientific investigation.
So God suddenly kind of dived into the evolutionary process and said, right, from now on they're going to be persons.
Well, whether he dived into an evolutionary process or did it specially
you don't believe in
an
evolution
open question.
Or?
I do believe in evolution as far as Darwin saw it, the variation and modification that we've
of miracles. Do miracles occur where things happen that are clearly breaking the laws of nature? That's a tough question for a scientist, but actually it's not as tough for me as maybe it seems. The big question is, do you believe in a God who is interested in human beings and who exists at least in part outside of nature? If you accept those things, then the idea that God could, on rare occasions, to suit his purposes, invade the natural world and temporarily suspend those laws in a way which to us would certainly have to appear as if something miraculous had happened.
Do you have any speculations on how this might happen on a causal basis?
In the physical intervention arena, no. I mean, it would be a suspension of the laws of nature, which is very hard to get your mind about how that would work. But I think
at the quantum level, at the atomic level, cellular level, species level, who knows, right?
We're trapped in these physical laws. To imagine how they could be suspended is just impossible to get my mind around. But God isn't trapped in them. He designed them. So if he chose to suspend them, he would figure out a way, be it quantum or whatever.
My own sense of how people come to be believers in a personal God is that you can get a certain distance with these kinds of intellectual arguments, but at some point you have to basically decide, I'm not going to get all the way there, and that's what I found happening to myself in my 28th year. And that really required then for me a decision. Am I going to stop at this point, retaining this sort of perspective of that's interesting, and I'm a skeptic, but I'm not convinced yet? Or had I reached the point where I could really no longer resist the conclusion? And I found I had reached that point, and I'm not sure I can completely put that into rational, rigorous intellectual terms, but it was very compelling and remains so today. And I find the concept, the doctrine of Satan, to be one of the murkier ones in Christian theology. I'm not willing to either embrace it in a very traditional conservative way, because I don't quite follow why one should, nor am I willing to say that's just a lot of superstition, because it seems to me that other figures in my faith that I hold in great reverence, including Christ himself, were in fact unwilling to discount the reality of Satan. So I'm still on the road on this.
And I believe, in fact, that God interacts with the unfolding creation, but doesn't overrule the acts of creatures. So there is a very delicate balance there. And there's been a very big movement in 20th century theology to see that while God is undoubtedly has an eternal aspect, God also engages with time, a sort of dipolar picture of God, a God who is both connected with time but also outside time. And that's puzzling and difficult to work out, but I think it's absolutely essential. Because you see, God knows things, obviously, as they really are. And if this world is really temporal, then God will know it in its temporality. And I find that helpful. And it carries some strange implications. For example, if the world is truly temporal and unfolding, I believe that means that God does not yet know the future. That's no divine imperfection. I mean, I think anyone who's a theist will believe that God will know anything that is knowable. But if the future does not yet exist, then even God can't know it. That's needless to say, there's a good deal of contention in theological circles about that, but that's what I believe to be the case.
Yeah, I have the immaterial world as a category. There's the abstract immaterial world and the non-abstract.
Okay.
The abstract immaterial world includes Platonic forms, moral values. The non-abstract material world, persons including God.
Okay.
Even if God is not in space and time, he's still not an abstract form. He's an individual person, and angels are finite persons.
Then we have this category of immaterial persons, of which God is one kind and angels and demons are another kind. What I'm asking is, in this category, is there anything else other than persons?
No, not to my knowledge. I'm speculating. By the way, I'm in both realms, not the abstract and the concrete, but the physical and immaterial. Because as a person, my immaterial soul is a part of the unseen immaterial realm, but my body is a part of the concrete.
So in essence, now we have of this non-abstract immaterial realm three things: we have God, we have the finite persons of angels and demons, and we have the immortal souls that you believe in, which is definitely distinct from the other two categories. So we have three subsets
and
of the
even
immaterial.
animal. I believe animals
I'll give you
have
four subsets.
souls that they're not physical.
And so what does that history that predates humans show? Well, it's a history of predation and parasitism, death, extinction, you name it. So there's, how do you make sense of that? Because here you have humans that come after the fact. How is it that you don't seem to have that good old-fashioned theodicy where humans are responsible for the evil they're experiencing? And so I've struggled with this in trying to formulate a theodicy. The old way of thinking of the effects of the fall is that the fall happens and then things go haywire. Well, couldn't it happen that the fall happens and in a sense God, who's outside of time, changes the past and introduces natural evil, for the sake of humanity to be a mirror of the fall. And it seems to me that even our understanding of evil, we understand evil by the evils we see in nature. I mean, could we fully appreciate evil if we didn't have examples of vipers and parasitism and things like that? I mean, nature gives us wonderful metaphors for the evil in our hearts. So
take the birth of Jesus. I think what a lot of people have said, and what I've preached on myself from time to time, is here you have a long history of preparation for the coming of God in a new way. Here you have a particular life, that of Mary, opening itself up to the action of God in a certain way. And then there is, as I say, an opening. Something comes through, something fresh happens, which is not, if you like, a suspension of the laws of nature, but nature itself opening up to its own depths. Something coming through. Now,
I'm not sure what that means. It sounds to me awfully like suspending.
Poetic language.
It's poetic language.
And I realise that there are ways of talking about that which do simply sound like interrupting things.
I mean, I, of course, love poetic language, but there does come a time when you worry that people are going to misunderstand it as...
Or that it's a way of wriggling out of hard questions.
Well...
If we've been on this planet for 100,000 years as Darwinian primates, having pretty much the same brains that we have now, why is it the case that for 95,000 of those years man accomplished virtually nothing? Not having invented a wheel, not having come up with a cave painting even, and then suddenly, 5,000 years ago, history gets started. History gets started in a lot of different places, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, everybody starts inventing stuff. It does appear as if some sort of a transcendent breath may have grabbed a couple of those Darwinian primates and breathed something we might call a soul into them.
I was hit with a bunch of different questions. How can are you telling me you believe someone was born of a virgin, walked on the ocean, brought dead people back to life? Are you nuts? We're living in the 20th century, now the 21st century. And don't you believe science operates according to unvarying laws? Or, how do you know your religion is true? If you were born in Saudi Arabia, wouldn't you be a Muslim? Now, my point is, I wanted to believe, but my brain was getting in the way.
He disclosed in his closing book there that he was dispositionally a homosexual, but never fulfilled that for the sake of Christ. And I have read many authors who say that. So I say to the one who has that disposition, yes, it has to be tough. It has to be tough. But sometimes we renounce our dispositions for the sake of Christ and just wait and hope and trust for the possibility that he would give us that resistance.
You have to distinguish between changing God and affecting him. It's possible to affect something without changing it if your effect, without changing it, makes it different than it would have been. God eternally, timelessly hears you. Because of that, because he hears you, he's different than he would have been had you not spoken. But he's always been in that different state. Let me just state that. You have not changed God by speaking, but you have made him to be as he eternally and timelessly is. And had you not spoken, he would have eternally and timelessly been a different way. See, suppose God is in time, but he sees the future, as many people think.
Sure.
And, okay, then 10,000 years ago, God saw you having this conversation. So your having it now doesn't change his cognitive state. He's always, as far back as he was there and was foreseeing you, he was always in that condition. But you account for the fact that he was in that condition eternally, back through time, as we're now supposing. He's always known, always seen you doing this. Because of that, you've always had an effect on him, but you've never changed it.
For me, the thought that everything perishes in the heat death of the universe is so depressing, so awful that it just seems to put a question mark behind everything we do. All our accomplishments, all our deeds just seem so trivial in light of this cosmic doom that awaits us all.
But not for me.
Yeah.
It seems to me. It seems to me that
I just don't understand.
If I've saved somebody's life, I've done something significant. I've done something important. I've done something whose significance is not in any way threatened, diminished, reduced one iota by the fact that whatever it is, 40 billion years from now, the sun will explode. It's neither here nor there. I've saved a human life. That's what matters. And the fact it doesn't have cosmic significance doesn't seem to me to undermine its significance.
Is it possible for God to step in and determine an otherwise indeterminate event in order to achieve an action in the world? And that's effectively an idea of God cheating at playing dice. Einstein said that God plays dice or didn't like the idea of God playing dice in quantum mechanics. Theological attempts to fit the two together is effectively where God is playing dice with one hand, but then is also breaking the rules with the other. Now, the great benefit, this is speaking rather cynically, the great benefit from theologians' perspective is that although you can never prove that God acts in this particular way, you can never prove that he doesn't. And the reason for this is something Hempel rather sort of grandiosely called the problem of epistemic ambiguity. Essentially, you don't know, if you've got probabilistic laws in play, which probabilistic law is the active law that's determining that particular event. And in the same way that if quantum mechanics is probabilistic, how do you actually know that it isn't God determining something or just chance? There is no way of telling it apart.
God's differentiated creation, which nevertheless is designed to work together, ultimately heaven and earth and male and female, and that doesn't seem to be just a sort of accidental genetic quirk that humans are like that. And indeed that the grand narrative of Scripture goes right through to a conclusion, which is the marriage of heaven and earth, and the bride of Christ and Christ the bridegroom. And of course, some people would say, so the Scripture is an ancient and basically homophobic text. You know, learn to distance yourself from it. And I would then want to say, which bit of moral high ground do you stand on from which to pass that judgment on this text?
Selected from the start. He had all these different possibilities, all these different possible worlds he could have made actual. He wanted to make a really good one actual. All the best ones contain incarnation and atonement, but any world that contains incarnation and atonement also has to contain evil, sin, and not just a little bit of it. I mean, if all the evil there was mere peccadillo on the part of an otherwise admirably disposed angel, then it would be massive overkill for there to be incarnation and atonement. So there's got to be a lot of it. And hence any world, any really good world is going to contain a great deal of evil.
So God is choosing worlds that have evil, so that tantamounts to God creating evil.
I don't know if it amounts to his creating evil, but it does amount to his choosing worlds that contain evil. I mean, the evil is a means to or a necessary condition of something really good. It's not that the evil gets chosen for its own sake, but this whole world, which contains evil, does get chosen. Right. It may be that other creatures, other free creatures, have had a substantial hand in the whole development of life on Earth, so that all the waste, all the pain, all the suffering that goes along with predation in the whole evolution of life, starting say, I don't know, 500 million years ago or something like that, all that is also, in the long run, due to the free activity of other creatures. That's a possibility. It's kind of a wild suggestion, and one which nowadays will raise eyebrows, but I don't think that's anything against it.
Sometimes you say that God doesn't intervene, and you make a very eloquent case for why it would be a rather undignified sort of thing to do as a God. On the other hand, you say he does intervene when he rescues one child from an earthquake.
I've been over this ground. Do you want to I think we've covered this to some extent.
Well, have you? Because
just wondering...
I mean, but
to be honest, I haven't quite got it myself.
Okay. Reformulate.
It's concentrating on this one child.
We're concentrating on this one child.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So we're focusing on that one situation. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that in the case of, for example, a child surviving where tens of thousands others did not, then clearly, some have died. Let me start again. Just refocus. I think in the case of a situation where many thousands may have died, for example, as in the recent earthquake, yet one survives, obviously there is this very important question: did God choose to save that one? If so, what was wrong with all the others? And I think that the natural Christian instinct, which I believe to be correct here, is indeed to speak of God saving that child, not because God wanted any others to perish, but because God, as it were, chose to save that one. And I think that the whole language here, which we find, for example, in Augustine, is that of God wanting to do something in the midst of a world which is not perfect. And again, the Christian vision of the world is that this is not the way God wants the world to be. It's the idea of an imperfect, a fallen world, a world of suffering, where things happen which God does not want to happen. And the key point, again, I want to stress is that I do not believe it represents any failure on God's part, that this is a world of suffering, a world of death, a world where things happen which we know God would not want to happen, and at the same time be able to say that in some way God is able to bring some good out of these disasters, for example by saving a person there, by doing something else there.
Well, I think we're just going to have to leave it at that, because I think we're never going to resolve that.
There is a strict lack of determination in the microscopic world. So I think that may not be a coincidence, that looks something like free will. I mean, it's not, of course. I'm not saying that electron actually has a consciousness of the kind that we have, but it probably has the rudiments of a consciousness. In some rudimentary sense, every atom has a mind, and then what the brain is simply some sort of an apparatus for amplifying the molecules, amplifying the choices that are made by individual molecules and converting them onto a scale of human beings. So that seems to me very plausible, that the existence of quantum mechanics has something to do with the existence of human consciousness. Of course, that point of view is very unpopular among biologists. Most biologists think quantum mechanics has nothing to do with it. But anyway, I beg to differ. that the sort of traditional God is sort of outside of space and time. He sees everything, understands everything, and knows everything. And he's also omnipotent very often. But my God is different. He's part of the universe. He evolves with the universe. He doesn't know what's going to happen. So his knowledge increases as time goes on. So he's in doubt just as we are, and of course our contributions are in fact his growth. I mean, he grows through the contributions of creatures like us.
Origin of Adam is, as I say, something of the order, let's just say, 20,000 years ago. At that time, there were Aborigines in Australia, there were Native Americans in the Americas, there were peoples in the Far East, in China. We could not all be physically, genetically descended from a couple living in the Near East. But what we could be, of course, is spiritually descended. If, and this is pure hypothesis, if God's image in us was implanted and then spread to all the species living at that same time. John Stott makes a distinction which can be really quite helpful, that we were Homo sapiens, we're now Homo divinus, divine man and woman, of course. There'll be no difference in the bones in this process. So there's no problem about the fossil record of humans. The key factor is that at some stage God put his finger on that original population.
Say, well, God is not any kind of thing, because if God were a kind of thing, God would just be one of the other kinds of things that there are, only a rather different one. So we're not talking about something that's on the map of creation. We're talking about something which is off the map of creation, which is why what we're talking, how we're talking now, is a kind of bamboozling nonsense, if you like. That's, by the way, called negative theology. That is to say, knowing that you don't know what you're talking about at this stage. And I think that's really what theology is about. It's the sense that on the other side of our language is something which sustains it, which can't be contained within it. And I think this is what Wittgenstein was after at the end of the Tractatus, when he said, well, what underlies how we say things cannot itself be said. Yes. And that's what we call God.
But it could also be claimed that what lies beyond the possibility of being expressed or said is something about which you'd better be silent in order not to talk nonsense.